And welcome back. It's now 6 minutes away from 7 o'clock, and as promised before the break, we're sitting down to get a government's perspective on the production and importation of rice. And joining us for this conversation, we have the CEO from the Ministry of Agriculture, Jose Alpuche, and we have Director General of Foreign Trade, Dr. Leroy Almendarez. Good morning, gentlemen, and welcome to the show.
Pleasant good morning to you and to your viewers, and compliments of the season to everybody.
Now, obviously, the conversation of rice has been something that has been going on for quite some time, and it's one time that we can really say, what does it have to do with the price of rice? So let's start there in terms of that has been one of the main parts of the conversation, that it boils down to pricing and what consumers can expect.
The price of rice indeed is the topic, the main topic, but the underlying issue is competition, and indeed whether it's fair competition. And I would put it to you that what we have coming in from Guyana is far from fair competition. Our industry, it's very small. We produce rice up in Shipyard, in Blue Creek, in the area of Spanish Lookout, and also down south, the old traditional rice producing area. We produce roughly a little less, about 9,500 to 10,000 metric tons a year. So it's a fairly small industry. That's about 21 million pounds of rice.
How much do we consume on an annual basis, more or less?
About that amount. The Guyanese industry, on the other hand, produces, in 2014, produced 635,000 metric tons. That gives you an idea of what we're dealing with. They also subsidize their farmers. We don't. Except, I would say, we do provide some targeted support to rice producers down south, but it's really and truly direct support. It's not direct subsidies. The Guyanese industry, on the other hand, and I have a speech here from the minister that he gave in July of this year, in which he said that the Guyana Rice Development Board provided government assistance to farmers in the form of seed, paddy, and fertilizers. And then he says too that the Rice Board distributed 153,000 bags of seeds. That's only a very small snapshot into what they're doing with their industry. Another issue is that their industry is over 100 years old, and they are still subsidizing it. Ours is much younger, especially the mechanized farming outside of the Toledo district. It's a much younger industry, and we are not subsidizing it. We have them facing, the realities of the marketplace. So that, to a large extent, underpins the price differential between what could occur from Guyana and what occurs in Belize. Another fundamental point, though, is that Guyana had invested quite a bit to sell rice into Venezuela. As you know, they've had differences. That export into Venezuela has ended. Last year, which was a low year for exports of Guyanese rice to Venezuela, they did over 80,000 tons. That's 8 times our entire national production here, just to the market in Venezuela. They've lost that, so they're looking for a home for that. That brings on an additional issue of whether the price that they're offering to Belize right now is sustainable or if it constitutes dumping. I put it to you that it constitutes dumping. Just on Venezuela, they have 80,000 tons of rice.
And can we define what dumping is in terms of economics?
Once you put something on the marketplace below the cost of production,
Because they weren't able to get it into Venezuela, they need to get
Get
it
it
out.
somewhere else,
So
right.
they'll do it at a reduced
But
cost.
let me add a point here.
Please, go ahead.
Let's look at the simple production function. You need inputs to get output. In this case, you might talk about fertilizers because we're talking about rice. If any one of those inputs is zero, which means that it's subsidized or paid for, it's the cost of producing a pound of rice is then cheapened. It is cheapened to such a point, and under the law, under the revised Treaty of Chaguaramas and under the World Trade Organization, because I've heard mention of both of them, as long as that happens, any form of subsidy, because that is a subsidy, it is a violation. It is a violation because what it does, it causes trade distortion. You have given yourself, you have an advantage over the others. In our case, where it's not subsidized, the cost of production will be much, much lower. And because it's much, much lower, see what happens. You have to remember, there are also cases where there have had cases where those farmers have not been paid, or the farmers are subsidized. That again takes the cost of production even lower. So think about the amount of inputs that they're not paying taxes for. You have taxes on inputs. Any revenue foregone to government as a subsidy. So you see what happens. It's easier then, if their cost of production is that low, for them to send it or to export into other countries. Now,
Let me just interject here, because I want us to tackle what has been the main issue so far, and in terms of the explanation for the importation of the Guyanese rice. And you have the very same book that the importers brought in, the copy of the Treaty of Chaguaramas.
right.
And that is what they are saying gives them the right to be able to import the Guyanese rice without interference from government, because we are signed on to the Treaty of Chaguaramas.
If there was fair competition, they would have the right.
So that's what I want to say.
Let's stick to
Obviously, this is interpretation that I'm hearing
And
here.
it depends.
So what is the interpretation that you are saying in terms of what is allowed for under the
And it
treaty?
depends on which part of the treaty they were quoting.
Okay.
Because there are so many different parts of it. Let's take, for example, at the Council of Trade and Economic Development, which deals with trade issues, one of the main organs of the revised treaty. We must also understand that the purpose of this revised treaty is integration. Mm-hmm. Integration simply means we come as a one common marketplace, and we do not entertain unfair competition. What we should be entertaining is a form of collaboration, because it's economic development for all member states, all 15 that have signed on to this. The other thing is, Belize is an LDC under this treaty. Guyana, MDC, means are more developed, we're less developed. And the treaty specifically makes concessions for LDCs, for these least developed countries. But there's another aspect of it. At the 40th Quartet, which I attended, we met with the Minister of Trade, we met with the head of the GRDB, the Guyana Rice Development Board, and they assured us it will be a government-to-government issue. If the government of Belize does not want the rice to, in other words, if we're not open to give market access to that rice, they will not impose it on us. I also met with the Honorary Council of Guyana, and this is what he said. In the event there's a shortage of rice, meaning that consumption, because we have people who want to consume more than what is produced, that will create shortage in the economy. And if that creates shortage, then it means that we'll be open to importing. There's no shortage of rice in Belize. We have a surplus. The other thing I've heard is this whole thing about the fact that I will only import so much. Now remember, this individual, that's not the government of Guyana. That rice could have been bought much cheaper and be placed on the market. And believe me, under this treaty, it will cause harm. It will cause harm.
You have classified it as unfair. Let's talk about whether or not, because this has been, and I know that it is eventually to become a legal matter. The issue here that the importation was initiated before any permits were allowed for. What are the rules and regulations in terms of trade in that manner?
I'll be very careful about what I say, as this matter will, I believe, end up in court. But indeed, you do have to obtain a license, phytosanitary license, before bringing in any product into Belize. He did not obtain the the phytosanitary license, and that's one of the grounds on which the current importation is being held.
Now, when you look at it in terms of you have an individual looking at bringing in rice, what does that mean in terms of any local production, and especially when you're getting it in terms that you call it unfair competition, even if it's coming from within CARICOM?
William, most of our importers know of this, of the fact that Guyanese rice is out there, but most of our importers have, quite frankly, stayed away from it because they knew that it could cause injury to domestic production. We have had this conversation, as Dr. Almendarez said, he had the conversation with the Guyanese also. We've had this conversation with the importer here prior to all of this happening, but he's just chosen to still bring it in. Yes, we believe that if that rice lands here and I will say it at the dump price at this point in time, it will injure domestic production. As a matter of fact, I even believe that a time limit at which they could guarantee the price has been given. So that in and of itself says that it's not a structural price differential, that it's a limited, and that limited can only be that they've lost 80,000 tons of market into Venezuela.
Now there's also...
But let's go back quickly to the subsidy. Under the law, under the treaty, if you go to 96 or 106 to 110, the articles, it will tell you that if Belize, for example, claims under WTO or under the revised treaty that this subsidy is causing trade distortion, what can happen is this. One of the things that can happen, depending on what that level of subsidy is, that can be added to the price because it's an injury. Now let us say you take up the subsidy because it's revenue foregone. The price of rice imported would be greater than what it's claiming to be. And that's where I'm going to leave it there, the possibility of, that it goes to court. Under this treaty as well, Article 92 provides that level of, and I don't want to use the word protection so loosely, but remember again, under that, if something is being exported, some commodity is being exported into a market and creates any kind of issue for the domestic industry, as the CEO mentioned, as I mentioned before, we can then, under this law, under Article 150, it speaks to safeguards. And safeguard simply says, you know what? If Belize applies for that to the Secretary General of the CARICOM Secretariat, what can happen here is an imposition on that imported product that for no less than 3 years, that product cannot even enter our markets. No less than 3 years.
And that would mean any rice from Guyana.
And you also mentioned any rice. Any rice. You also mentioned another issue, and it's important that we remember this because I think you're implying here that the possibility exists that any other product then can be targeted. Under the law, products are identified as sensitive industries. It simply means here you cannot, if an industry is classified as sensitive, then it simply means that that's an industry that nothing else can come into this market and create any kind of problems for. Let's take banana, let's take citrus, because that's where, you have the conversation saying, well, let it be anything. No, that's not the case. Then it simply means that those who have signed on to this treaty need to ask back for their signature because we are all in the process of violating it if that's the kind of thinking we have.
Two other points I wanted to raise very quickly because they talk about a disparity in payment for rice, even within the country, and that government has sought to protect the larger producers instead of helping the smaller producers to in terms of payments.
That's a blatant misrepresentation of fact by someone who used to be CEO in the Ministry of Agriculture. We pay Toledo farmers approximately 32 cents on average for paddy. Paddy then needs to be processed into rice. It's well known that we have quite a mixture of varieties coming down south, and the quality is not very high. Conversion rate is about half. So just off the top, without putting in the cost of actual milling, you're talking about it doubling at 64 cents. On top of that, of course, there's cost as it relates to milling. There's the fact that we're putting out, the mill is well below what is its optimum quality, so you're losing money on little throughput. We are paying the farmers much more than actually we're earning on the market. That's why I said we have, right, for paddy rice. That's why I said we do have an element of indirect subsidies only for that very, very small portion of rice down south. The reality is that the only rice that the government of Belize deals with, it's the rice from down south. We don't mill or market the production elsewhere. We're only taking care of the very small production down south. So to suggest that we're somehow subsidizing the larger importers, it's quite frankly an outright lie, and they know it.
Let's talk about the release from the Bureau of Standards. Obviously, one of the things this has prompted was the amendment to the price for grade C rice. And this was also a part of what had been in the conversation when it came to the price of rice. Two things I want to point out here that has been the argument from the importers. One is that in 2014, Guyanese rice was imported. And that is part of the justification that they use, that they had an expectation to be able to get the permit from Baja.
A shortfall.
Yes.
We had a shortfall.
Secondly, they had claimed that the price currently being paid on the market was too high. Shortly after, we saw the release from the Belize Bureau of Standards that the price for grade C rice had in fact been amended.
You will recall that in 2013, early 2014, we had tremendous rains. Now, rice likes water, but rice does not necessarily like too much water. And we did have a partial crop failure in rice and in many other products during that period of time. We had to resort to importing rice. It was agreed that the BMDC would import the rice specifically not to open Pandora's box. So the rice was imported, the rice was passed on to the traditional millers for sale. There was a price differential, yes, but quite frankly, the farmers lost millions of dollars in the partial crop failure. What they recouped from the market by selling that imported rice was not anywhere near the losses. And we have no insurance program for the farming community. So it's one form of allowing them to have something to get back on their feet. It's the same thing, and this is again a practice that's been in place for many years within the Ministry of Agriculture. As it relates to the new pricing regime, it's not only a pricing regime, it's a new pricing regime, but also to a standards and packaging regime, compulsory at that. I've been having this discussion with the rice farmers for quite some time. If only agrarian reform happened at the snap of a finger, we would not be having this conversation. But it takes years. I mean, look at sugar. We've been at it from 1995. So it takes a little while. What was agreed earlier this year is that we would implement a new quality standards and packaging requirements. Why packaging and why quality? You go into any shop at the moment, a retail outlet, and you see in the corner of a store in very unsanitary conditions, rice, flour, sugar, all sorts of things being packed somewhere on the side. without regard to food safety and human health, etc. So we decided we'd take the opportunity to also put in place this new packaging regime that will mean that the rice that must be prepacked at the mill would be done in proper conditions. You would be getting for the quality that you pay for, and you will be getting 16 ounces as opposed to 14. And we have a number of issues with the way the system is structured right now, where 100 pound is sold to the retailers, and some of them, quite frankly, are unscrupulous. They use the long grain, they go and they buy more brokens and they mix it, so you're getting a lesser grade, and then you get less than you're actually paying for. This system should correct that. For that system to work, there's a number of investments. Literally hundreds of thousands of dollars, if not millions of dollars, have actually had to gone into so that we could standardize the packaging regulations. We had a delay in the sense that Shipyard decided that they would build their own mill, and the mill is still not fully operational, but we had to give them the time. They're investing, I think the number they gave us was something like about $1.3 million. We had to give them some time to complete that investment to get their production up and running before we could implement the new regime. It is coincidental that it happened around the same time, but if you were following, if you read the Gazette, you would have seen that the new standards were published in October. And we had to give them a little extra time to come up with to complete their investments before we could implement the full program.
Some people would argue.
Let me just add something on this whole shortfall, because we don't want it to be thought of that the only way this rice could have been sourced was from Guyana. It was not the only place. Under the treaty again, and I'll keep making reference to it so that we can not justify, but for clarification purposes. Let us say Belize, when it had the shortfall, Belize could have sourced rice from outside the region as well. The only thing that applies here is that there's something called a common external tariff. That common external tariff, let us say when we indicated to the Secretariat, and that's where you're supposed to go. You go to the Secretary General, and you say to the Secretary General, there's a shortfall, we need rice. Anybody from within member states can supply. The member states that supply are supposed to be able to supply based on the standards that we set. It must be based on standards. In the event that it cannot be supplied from intra-regionally, we can source it extra-regionally. It simply means that we'd have applied for a suspension on this tariff so that the cost of imports into the country would not go up. So it did not have to be from Guyana. At that point in time, that was a specific point in time. The rice came in from there.
Some people are arguing that that is duplicitous, that it sets, when it's convenient, the interpretation is there. Now, CEO Alpuche, you spoke about it as the direct response to a shortfall. So that's a determining factor in that situation? Yes,
we would not import if we don't have the shortfall. There's usually sufficient production in the country to satisfy demand. And in this case, it was a shortfall, but a shortfall caused by a natural disaster. The farmers had lost considerable amount of money, as they did this year with the other side, with drought, and now with rains. Mm-hmm. Look, the business is risky. The business is difficult. This is not a case of having a warehouse, having some trucks, having some people employed, that you bring in something, hold it in a warehouse and sell it. There's virtually no risk involved in that. What the farming community has to go through to produce rice, to produce sugar, to produce just about everything, it's a totally different set of considerations that must be given to production and in the protection that we offer to that production in their time of difficulties.
Now let me ask, because it's very interesting. We took to the streets last week and asked the people that we met, what rice they would buy if the rice was imported. And I would say that the majority of persons took a nationalistic standpoint. They would support local even if it costed more. I think what the broader conversation entails is looking at CSME. And we've talked about movement of workers. We've talked about exporting services. And I think that what is coming into question at this point is what is the protection for our domestic markets? Is it that government does have some responsibility to ensure that local producers, as in this case rice, will be able to maintain their business? Or is it as open as it is being said in other quarters that if something is being produced in another part of the Caribbean or another part of CARICOM, that it can be brought into the country?
But we must, really, I think the literal nature with which you just discussed that. Let's take, for example, yes, it says the CARICOM single market and economy. The economy is not in existence as yet. It's now a CARICOM single market. It's a marketplace for the free movement of goods and services.
Yes.
I heard Article 79 being mentioned, where you cannot put in any form of restrictions. It does not mean that there are no form of protection as well. It's not let me just say this. Whenever we go to COTED, the Council for Trade and Economic Development, you can hear how things are ventilated because you must go there to protect your interests, even though it's integration. I'll give you an example. Grenada has been trying to get honey into Trinidad for the longest time. It's not there because Trinidad is saying that the quality and standards of my honey, I don't want your honey to come in and violate that because maybe we have the wrong bees. Think about that. You have poultry. We've been trying to get poultry into Trinidad. What affected us recently was the fact that they found the low pathogen avian influenza. But it does not mean that you just take your chicken and put it and send it over there. Because the receiving countries have certain procedures that have to be met and complied with. You have market access, yes. Market entry is a different issue. Entry means that the product actually enters. There are certain procedures, and especially where our human health or our plant health and those kind of things is potentially for being violated, then the procedures have to be more stringent. All countries understand that. I'm sure that if this is taken to COTED, as a matter of fact, I know the people from Grenada, I'm from Guyana very well, and they have never brought up the possibility of exporting, otherwise it would have been discussed there. Another thing we have to mention, Guyana rice, yes, it's now at 635,000 metric tons. They export to 32 different countries. They have now introduced or found new markets such as Panama, etc. They don't only produce white rice. There are 4 different grades that they produce. So when you really think about it, and this is why I'm saying that they have enough markets, yes, they have these surpluses, but it does not simply mean that you take it, as the CEO has said, and you decide you will send it in a barge or send it somewhere and say, take this to Belize and just dump it on the market.
Let me say there was a time when Haiti had a vibrant rice industry, and you could ask them what happened to their rice industry when they allowed subsidized American rice to come in. You can ask the Jamaicans what subsidized poultry meat did to their poultry sector. These are well documented, well cataloged. Actually, there are celebrity cases as it relates to the cost of free trade. We simply cannot sit idly by and watch this happen to domestic production in Belize. Keep in mind what I said earlier, the Guyanese industry is over 100 years old, and they are still receiving direct government subsidy. Our large-scale production, it's much more recent, and they're not receiving direct subsidies as they do in Guyana.
Let me ask a basic question, because the one thing that this rice conversation has led to is a discussion in many quarters in terms of how do you work to protect your local producers and why that is significant. People may have different reasonings, and we've been talking about food security and so many other things, almost in a vacuum that people don't necessarily see the connection with in a situation like this, because at the end people think it's open competition, and if I as a consumer can get a lower price, then let's go for the lower price.
All right, that's basic economics. But remember, where you have a regulated market, there's a form of regulation. Wherever you have regulation, then it simply means that there are other things that are in play. If you have a free market, let's forget regulation. The CSME is a form of regulation. And in mere fact, if it did not exist, those are the kind of things that would have happened. The larger countries would have been imposing their products into the smaller countries and destroying domestic industries, and we've been so import dependent. Now, think about it. No exports going out. We still need to find foreign currency for our imports and all of that. Think about what it would have been doing to smaller economies. Under the WTO, we refer to as small and vulnerable economies. That simply means, again, that's a layer of protection that exists. Costa Rica is being taken right now as a safeguard because of the level of subsidy. Let's talk about subsidy just quickly for a minute. Under WTO and even under this treaty, it doesn't say that subsidy has to be zero. But if subsidy exceeds what is called de minimis means there's a threshold. Under the WTO, it's 10%. Any entity that receives subsidy above 10%, that is a strict violation. And let me tell you this, where does it go further? It becomes a case that is taken either to the Secretary General or to the WTO. Initially, it takes about 60 days just to go through the legal due diligence and investigation. It takes about 4 more months before the investigation is completed and a report is sent. If it is found out that you have violated that, any revenue that was lost because of the trade distortion that you caused can now be imposed on you retroactively, and you have to pay that country that was importing your product.
And you brought me back to a point that I wanted to discuss earlier, because we've been looking at the fine structure that government has in place. For some people, they see it as a little slap on the wrist that people will still go ahead and say, okay, fine. That means absolutely, I think it's what, 200?
That's their interpretation of the rules.
So let's discuss the fining structure.
That will be discussed in the Supreme Court or the CCJ. But that is their interpretation. Look, William, we have a system at the moment right now where some importers believe they can do whatever they want, especially as it relates to agricultural products. We have to protect the agriculture health. You see what has happened from the contamination in shrimp, from the contamination in the poultry sector, from greening in citrus. We have got to do what we've got to do to protect agriculture health. BAHA is there for a reason. We have had some practices evolving that are certainly not in the best interests of our agriculture industry, and we've got to do what is required. If I could come back to the original thing on the price of rice, in 2009, the maximum wholesale price per 100 pound sack of rice was on average $126. So that's $126 per pound wholesale, $131 per pound retail. The price has gone down considerably since then. In 2011, it was 86 wholesale and 101 retail. What you have in the marketplace is you have tremendous price gouging by some of the very same importers and retailers that are basically abusing this. The control price should be $1.01. That is where the price of rice should be right now. Next week it will be, later this week, when the new regime enters, it will be 80 cents wholesale and 90 cents retail for grade C. We've had tremendous gouging. The Bureau is trying its best to try and get the consumers and the retailers to respond to this. We see what's going on with sugar right now. The price should not be raised until January 1. And I understand that in many stores right now, out to West and here even in Belize City, you supposedly can't get white sugar. What does that say? They're holding the sugar until the new higher price comes in. The delay in implementing the price was specifically to allow the old stock to be sold. So we have multiple layers that we have to deal with. But this is one where the consumer has got to be a little bit more savvy in pointing out those retailers, those importers that are actually gouging on prices like this.
So let's just, in terms of clearing up, and especially for the interest of the consumers, what price should they expect to find rice for on the shelves?
Well, the grade C will now have the 90 cents maximum retail price. That's another difference, subtle but a fundamental difference. We are not telling you that you have to sell rice at 90 cents. We're telling you that the maximum price you should pay for it is 90 cents. The premium rice will continue to float. There's more and more competition within the domestic market. Now, all mills have packaged rice. What we had in the past is that some didn't.
And do they have the grade on it so that you're able?
Yes. So now there will be competition because the domestic playing field has been leveled. So we expect that prices will, quite frankly, go down.
All right. And the status of the Guyanese rice?
The last I checked, it was still at the port. That's all I can say about that at the moment.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you, too.
Thank you.
All right. We're going to go ahead and take a break. When we come back, it's to talk about energy saving and safety over the holidays, so stay tuned.